Welcome back, everybody. So today I'm going to be doing a limb swap on a Mathew's Traverse. So my brother-in-law has a Traverse with 60-pound limbs. I'm going to be swapping that out for a set of 70-pound limbs today. So stick with us and we'll walk you through the process. So the first step in the process is to put the bow in the press and remove the cams so that we can relax the limbs and remove the limbs from the bow. I'm using an easy green press from Last Chance Archery. Makes this job a lot easier. I've got the upgraded 3-inch pin kit on my press with the new upgraded Mathews fingers. That's a must for any of you Mathews bow owners. Works with all the current model Mathews bows. So the first step is we actually have to remove this guide from the roller guard so that we can pull the cables off here without taking all the strings and cables off the cams. It'd be a lot easier to do this project if you leave the strings and the cables on the cams as you remove them. Leave it all together. That way when you put it all back on, it's just the way it was when you took it off. If you're doing this and replacing your strings at the same time, you can remove the strings and the cables and then remove the cams from the bow if that's an easier way to do it for you. But I'm going to show you how to do it with leaving the strings and cables intact. The second step in the process is to remove the axles from each end. Now you've got to put pressure on the press, so we've got to compress the limbs enough that we relax the strings and the cables, take all the pressure off the axle. And then we've got to loosen the axle screws that hold the axles in place. These are 1/4-inch axles that Mathews uses on all their bows, and they have a screw in the end of each axle to hold them in place. Loosen those screws, leave one of them partially backed out, and then remove the other one completely. I generally take the one off this side so that I can push the axle through the back to remove the axle. Each end has a washer, so there's a screw and a washer on each side of the axle that we're removing. I'll put that here in my little tray. I'm gonna put the wrench in that hole and push the axle out this back side. There's the axle. Put that in my tray. Now this cam is ready to remove. We'll slide it out from between the top hats, drop it down, leave it set there, and repeat that process on the other end of the bow. Okay, now that we've got both cams loose from each end, we're going to lift the bow, or the cams, and the strings and cables all off as one piece, and we're going to lay this down on the table over here behind us so we can pick it up, put it back on, and we'll get the new limbs on. Next, we're going to remove the top hats from both ends, and we want to make sure to take note how those top hats were positioned on each end of the bow. So here we take the left side out and the right side out. This isn't even a match set. So whoever had tuned on this bow before had incorrect set of top hats in there. So on these top hats, you'll see this mark here in the middle that indicates which set it goes with. The corresponding piece to this set would also have 2 marks in the middle, where you see this one has 2 marks at the end. So I automatically know that whoever was working on this bow before didn't know what they were doing because they didn't even have a matching set of top hats in there. we'll fix that when we put it back together. Now that we have removed the cams and the top hats from the limbs, we're gonna relax the bow, relax the limbs in the press until we can remove it. And that will take all of the pressure and the tension off of the limbs. Then I'm gonna take it over to the table behind us over here. I'll remove the current set of limbs and swap it out for the new set. And so I'll show you how we do that next. All right, so there we go. The bow is out of the press with no cams, no strings, no cables, no top hats, and it's ready for the limbs to be removed. So one thing about the Traverse that's unique from some of the current models is that on each limb it has this set screw right here that holds the limb and keeps it from, I guess it keeps it from popping out of place. So you've got to back each one of these screws out. There's 2 on each limb pocket, 1 on each side. Before you can remove the limbs, it's a little bit of a pain. So you actually have to back the limb bolt out here enough that you can get your wrench in there and remove those screws. Otherwise they will hit the riser and prevent you from being able to back them out all the way. So I'll back a little pressure off the limbs and I'll remove those 4 screws. Okay, now that we got the 4 screws removed, you can see remove there and remove there. We're gonna pop these limbs loose and get everything ready to install the new set. So one other important thing to remember whenever you're swapping limbs is you got to make sure that you match up the limb deflection. So I've got them laid here in pairs. This is the top pair. I've got them marked top left, top right, and you see they're both 106.5 deflection, so that's a match set. And then on the bottom, we've got bottom left, bottom right, and this is 107.5 on the right side deflection and 105.5 on the left. So the stiffer limb of the pair always goes on the cable guard side of the bow. So if you're right-handed, it goes on the right. If you're left-handed, it goes on the left. I marked these the way they came off the bow from the factory, so I know I've got these limb pairs the way they're intended to be. They shouldn't be very hard to put into place. Let's see, top left. The set I took out here was very tight. I'm not sure why. Okay, I've got each limb pair on the bow again. I got to replace those 4 screws on the limb pocket. Then I can put the bow back in the press. So before we put it back in the press, we're gonna go ahead and tighten the limb bolts down. It's okay to tighten them all the way down, bottom the limbs out. It takes a lot less force to press these limbs to put the cams and cables back on it than it does when you're drawing the bow back to shoot it. So you're not gonna harm the limbs by tightening these limb bolts all the way down, and it's just gonna make things a little easier to get it back in the press and get everything back together. So recommend snugging those up, and then you're ready to go back in the press. Make sure that the limbs are resting securely on the fingers. Mathews makes it real nice for us because we've got these brackets on the end of each limb that set securely on the fingers that are provided with these easy green presses. We're gonna press it down, get it ready to put the cams back on. So before I put the cams back on it, I got to get a set of top hats that are properly matched. And so go through my sets here, got a bunch of them. We really don't know how this bow is going to tune for Sam, just because he's never shot it before. So I'm going to put kind of the average set in there, top and bottom, that we can start with, and if we need to make adjustments later, we can always swap them out. But I'll show you what I'm talking about with it being a match set. So you can see here, you've got two top hats, and they have marks on each one showing that that's a matched pair. So on one top hat, you'll see there's a single line, and then on the other one there's a double line, but it's in the same position on the shaft of the top hat. Both of these are at the end. The other corresponding pairs, there's a set that has those marks in the middle, and the set that has those marks here towards the flange end. So one thing to know about Mathew's top hat kits is that all of these pairs create 175 thousandths spacing between the axle and the cam. And so you add up the flange thickness on both of these, adds up to 175 thousandths. So this particular set, this side's 75 thousandths, this side is 100 thousandths. And so together they make 175. The other sets, the flange on this side is considerably smaller, and this side is thicker to make up that same amount of spacing, 175 total. So that's how you know you've got a match set. I'm going to put this set in on the bottom. So generally in installing these top hats, the thinner flange section is going to go on the left side for a right-handed shooter. That's going to depend on how the bow tunes for you. Sometimes it may shift to the other side, but that's what the beauty of the top hats is. They can go in either side as long as it's the right combination. And then they do not have to be matched perfectly top to bottom. They can be different spacings top to bottom. I generally like to have them within one set, not a big divide, but just at least one set. There are 20 thousandths difference but from one set to the next. So I'm going to install the one with the single mark on the left, which is the thin side, and the double side on the right. Pretty easy to install. I just slide through the axle hole on the limb on each side. They press in, should be tight. If they're not tight, you might want to try to get a new set of limbs. And I've got the same set here for the top. You can see the marks. We're going to put the same one on the left, the thin flange, 75 thousandths, and the 100 thousandths flange on the right. So now the top hats are installed. We're ready to put the cams back on and insert the axles. So like I said earlier, I took this all off together. I'm going to bring it back and put it back together all the way it came off of the bow. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just let it rest on the top end. I'm going to install the bottom cam first. I can already tell I need to put a little bit more pressure on the limb, so I'm going to tighten up the press so that I've got plenty of length here. Now when you're putting these back together with a new set of limbs, a lot of times you're going to have to spread the limb tips out enough to make space to get that cam in there. So that's where the top hats come into play, is they're providing the right amount of space between the bearing on the cam and the axle or on the limb. So I've got it lined up best I can. I'm going to slide this axle back through the hole, and if you've done a good job setting your press up, it should be pretty easy to get that axle back through there. Sometimes it can be a bear if the limb tips don't line up well, which might be the case here. Willie on the left and Jack on the right. All right, we'll try it from the other side. See if we can get it to line up a little easier from this way. Sometimes it's just a little particular getting that limb axle back through the limb. There it goes. All right, push that all the way through. I'm going to get my screw and my washer. Go ahead and install the screw and washer on this off side over here. Now, it's important to note you don't want to over tighten these. They do have a little bit of Loctite on the threads of the screw, which help keep them tight. I've personally never really had any issues with them backing themselves out, but put a wrench on each side and just snug them up. Don't over tighten. That should be right good. Want to make sure the cam's still moving freely with no excess play in it. Everything looks good. I'll line up the cables and make sure everything's resting well before we take it out of the press. Make sure all the cables are on the bearings and across the roller guard and so on and so forth. More pressure where I can install this cam. Should be good. Install the other cam. Again, now spread the limb tips out so it'll make room for the cam to go in there. Plenty of room. Push it back together. We're going to install the axle. That went in nicely. Install the other screw. Make sure you don't cross thread them. These screws can be a little tricky to get started back. Just be patient with it. Make sure you get it lined up good. Do not cross thread it or you'll be sorry. You want to try to put equal pressure on both screws. It's not overly critical, but just main thing is don't over tighten them. Kind of just a feel thing. Okay, again, check that cam, make sure it's moving freely. It's not excess play side to side, so the bearings are good. The string is still on the cam just the way it was when I took it off. Make sure I put that back on the right way. Looks like I did. Make sure that the harness is fitting around the AVS bearings on both sides well, and make sure that your cable is fitting across the module on the bottom side. If it gets out of the track, things can be bad. So check the cables and the harness and the string on the other side. Looks like everything's good to go. The last step, I'm going to take a little pressure off of the limbs, tighten everything up. The last step is going to be to put the cables back in the cable guard, roller guard as they call it. The top cable should be running closest to you. Actually, that would be the bottom control cable. Should be running closest to the sight window side of the bow, and then the top control cable will be running on the cable stop side of the bow, or I guess the sight bar side of the bow. So both of those are in there. If they shouldn't be touching anywhere. So up and down, these cables should have even spacing to where they're not touching or rubbing each other in any way. And looks like everything's good to go. At this point, I can relax the limbs a little bit, put a little more pressure on everything, kind of help hold it in place. Then reinstall the keeper that keeps these cables in the roller guard, and we'll be done. Tighten this up. One last snug on this part here. You can get it as tight as you need to. This part, you got it as actually stripped out, but it's not going anywhere. So that's reinstalled. Everything's back together. All the cables look like they're where they're supposed to be. String stop, D-loop. We should be good to go. Let's take it out of the press. Okay, so there we go. We've got a complete limb swap on this Mathews Traverse. We've now got a 70-pound bow that Sam can use for 3D. I'm going to check the timing marks on the cams, make sure I've got the cables adjusted properly before we get this thing tuned up for Sam to start shooting some 3D with it. But that's how you do a limb swap. I mean, it's really not overly complicated. It does help to have the right tools with this Last Chance Easy Green press and the Mathews fingers to go with it. But if you've got a press that's suitable for your Mathews bow, you can do a limb swap with relatively no problem. However, as always, if that's something you're not comfortable with doing, take it to your local pro shop. Hope you find this information helpful. Tune back in for more videos like this on Ryan Jeffries Archery.
And make sure to like and subscribe.
It's always easy to misplace your wrenches. There it is. Maybe. Nope. Who knows? All right. Let's see. Let's tighten this up.